Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat
Shana
Shalom.
Tova. When I was in rabbinical school, I had a fear of public speaking. Now, lots of people have some trepidation and light nerves before they speak in front of a group. This was not that. This was a body shaking, short of breath, need to take a minute before I proceed type of phobia that had the potential to be more than slightly inconvenient given my chosen career path. But I was lucky. I had patient teachers and supportive classmates, people who cared enough about me and my need to one day be able to stand on a bima and teach some Torah, who gave me the tools and the resources and really the confidence that I needed to stand in front of a microphone without breaking a sweat. You can ask me later about we'll call them interesting exercises that my teacher gave me to break me of the phobia, but suffice it to say it worked, so I don't question to them, because look at me now, I'm loving the microphone. And by and large, I have learned to love public speaking. It's how I get to teach my Torah. It's how I invite you to grapple with new ideas with me. It's how I lead prayer and wrestle with the sacred texts of our people. It's how I bless our children and remember the people that we love. It's how I stand up for what I believe in. Public speaking is second nature to me at this point, most of the time. Earlier this week, I came to a microphone with anxiety for the first time in a long while. I noticed that some of my telltale signs were back. My breathing was a little bit uneven. My hands started to shake ever so slightly. I noticed that I was warm, even though there was a cool breeze outside. And it wasn't because I wasn't prepared. I was. And it wasn't because I didn't believe what I was saying. I did. It was because I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. I felt anxious and nervous for reasons that really had nothing to do with the act of speaking itself and everything to do with the emotional weight that I was carrying with me that day. On that day, I had gathered with other clergy members to speak at a press conference to help spread the message about a critical initiative on this year's ballot, an initiative that would put essential life-saving medical care back into the hands of people who need it and their doctors, an initiative that speaks to our Jewish values, upholds religious liberty, and champions reproductive freedom in one fell swoop. This was a message that I've shared countless times from countless different microphones. It was a message that I believe in with every fiber of my being. The message wasn't the reason for my anxiety. And it was a message that has and continues to be shared by this particular group of clergy that I stood with on that day, people whose wisdom I value and who I've come to care about not only as colleagues but as friends with similar passions and shared values. Sharing that message with these people, that was not the reason for my anxiety either. To pull from the words of the very great sage of our time, Taylor Swift, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. It was me. I was the reason. Because the day of that press conference wasn't just any day, it was October 7th. And for me, October 7th was not just another day. I shared with you last week that this past year has been for me one of immeasurable grief as I try to wrap my arms around my own broken heart and the broken heart of the world. So I didn't come to that press conference carrying only the weight of the fight for women and pregnant people, a fight that I believe is fundamental to my interpretation of Judaism. I was also carrying with me heartache and a need, yet unrealized even by me at this point, to be seen and heard as a Jew in pain on that day. I arrived at the church and I greeted my colleagues, and in each conversation we exchanged pleasantries and small talk. They asked me how I was doing, as you do with a friend that you haven't seen in a while. Today is a hard day, I would say. Today is a painful day. Today is a day of heartache. And my colleagues, people who I've stood alongside fighting for our shared values with, people who know me and who have spent countless hours dreaming with me and fighting for justice, they carefully looked away. They remarked about how busy this time of year must be for me, and they thanked me for making time to be there between our holy days. There was one exception, a pastor who quietly said, "I'm sorry today is hard. Can I give you a hug?" And she held me with kindness and with compassion, and she saw me in my fullness as a faith leader who cared about what we were there to speak about, and as a Jew who was in pain. We didn't need to discuss the whys. We didn't need to debate about right and wrong. We didn't need to talk about the unspeakable acts of violence that happened that day or in every day since that year started. She knew that whether or not we agreed or disagreed, that I was the same person that she had stood shoulder to shoulder with over these past weeks and months, and yes, at this point, years, fighting for the kind of world that we both believe our faiths believe in. But she was one person, and I found myself so flustered and so caught off guard by the careful avoidance of this potentially fraught topic that my anxiety spiked, and I was nervous. I was nervous that I wouldn't be able to say the right thing or ask the right question to begin the conversation. Nervous that I wouldn't be able to adequately articulate what being a Jew during this year and on this day means. Nervous that I would say something that would somehow erase all of the ways that I had proven myself to be a trusted colleague, and that I would find myself unwelcome in a space that has become an important and vital part of my rabbinate. And I failed at the very thing that I have asked you to do, the thing that I have been teaching and preaching for more than a year now, to have the hard conversation, to not make yourself or your beliefs smaller for the sake of someone else's comfort, to be vulnerable and to be honest about who you are and what you believe, to acknowledge when you don't have all the answers, to be open and curious to hearing something that makes you uncomfortable, and most importantly, to live boldly and proudly and passionately as a Jew. I did not do that this week. I wish that I had. I wonder if you've had these moments too. Moments when you diminished yourself or you didn't speak your truth. Moments when you chose not to wear your Judaism openly or proudly. Moments when you didn't speak up for fear of not being welcome. Moments when you could have had the hard conversation, but you didn't. So on this morning, on our holiest day of the year, let's make a start. We won't find all the answers. There isn't a sermon long enough in the world for that, and I promise you mine won't try to be. But let's really think about why we're not having those hard conversations. What's stopping us, and how do we get past it? Because we owe it to ourselves and each other to at least try. I imagine that a big part of our hesitation has to do with the very real threat of anti-Semitism in our country. Even as we sit here praying together this morning, we do so under the protection of guards and increased security protocols because we are living through an era of rising anti-Semitism, the likes of which most of us have not experienced or can even remember in our lifetimes. We knew that anti-Semitism was on the rise when white supremacists marched in Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us," in 2017. And when an anti-Semitic gunman killed 11 Jews as they prayed on a Shabbat morning in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. But in this past year, we've moved from a passive awareness and a growing concern to real and rising fear. We woke up to reports of swastikas painted and carved into desks and lockers in schools. We read about subways and streets and campus quads and city council and board meetings at schools becoming sites of anti-Jewish rhetoric and rallying cries across the country. We saw congressional hearings taking university administrators to task for failing to protect Jewish students on their campuses. We heard of heartbreaking incidents of anti-Semitism in high school from our very own Temple Israel teens. And if the anecdotal evidence isn't enough, the numbers don't lie. The Anti-Defamation League reported that the incidents tracked in 2023 represent the highest number on record since the ADL began collecting that data in 1979. Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, a professor, a historian, and the United States Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, has taught for many years that anti-Semitism is not confined to the fringes of society. It's not a relic of the past, but a present-day reality that manifests itself in insidious ways, permeating all corners of our world. Anti-Semitism rears its ugly head across the political spectrum. It can be found among far-right extremists who peddle old-age tropes of Jewish conspiracies and racial superiorities, to far-left activists, some of whom rely on anti-Semitism to spread their political views or cloak their anti-Semitism in political arguments. And it's true, anti-Semitism is not tethered to a specific time or place or political ideology. And while historically we've often seen and felt it from far right-wing white supremacists, in the past year the political left has had to face a reckoning of its own in the wake of increasing hostilities and anti-Jewish sentiment. For some time now we've heard from writers and scholars and politicians who warn of the liberal ideology that has the potential to be harmful to Jews. Folks like David Bernstein, the author of Woke Anti-Semitism, How a Progressive Ideology Harms Jews, who speaks with incandescent fervor about how liberal ideological tenets like diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, the exploration of intersectionality, and a recognition of privilege can be dangerous to the Jews. Bret Stephens recently doubled down on that train of thought, saying that after October 7th, an awakening of sorts occurred, calling this phenomenon the October 8th Jews, those who woke up a day after our greatest tragedy since the Holocaust to see how little empathy there was for us in many of the spaces and communities and institutions that we thought we comfortably inhabited. He goes on to talk about how little reciprocity there is for Jews who have historically showed up for others in their moments of pain and struggle. This rhetoric, combined with the very real moments in the past year when Jewish people found themselves unwelcome or unsafe in spaces and in coalitions that we helped to build and nurture, has caused some Jews to question whether we really belong there anymore. And those questions are reasonable, given where we are today. But I want to first say clearly and unequivocally, we do belong there. The notion that liberal and progressive ideology is somehow dangerous to Jews, I believe, feeds a harmful narrative where we risk divorcing ourselves from the Jewish values that we hold dear. Values that include a commitment to full and equal inclusion of all people. Values that include respect for human dignity and bodily autonomy. Values that include the scrutiny of our own biases. These are inherent expressions of our Jewish faith. And the idea that our pledge to show up for others is somehow contingent upon whether they will one day show up for us is actually an insult to our commitment to the causes that we claim are demonstrations of our Jewish values. So the answer is yes. In ideological terms, yes, we belong there. These ideas, they're not dangerous to us. And yet, when more than our ideology is threatened, we do have to consider how and when and in what ways we inhabit those spaces. What do we do when we have made commitments to partnerships and coalitions but find ourselves faced with anti-Jewish rhetoric? There is no easy answer as we confront the enormity of this question, and if there was, I probably wouldn't feel compelled to give a sermon about it today. But truthfully, I've wrestled with it mightily over the past few months. So today I want to share with you some of what has guided my thinking as I've searched for answers during the past year. The first consideration, of course, is physical safety. We cannot and should not be in any space if our bodily safety isn't assured. Nothing is worth putting ourselves in harm's way, and if you find yourself in such a situation, I beg of you, leave. But what do we do when it's somehow less clear? What happens if there are voices in our meetings, our partners in our coalitions that are anti-Semitic? What do we do then? And here's where it gets hard. We have a choice to make, and both options are valid. One choice is to leave. We can choose not to be a part of spaces that don't disavow anti-Semitic voices. And that option is reasonable, because staying could potentially subject us to verbal abuse or emotional harm. But there is another option, and that option is not to leave, to intentionally choose not to cede the space and instead claim it as equal partners and voices in the issues that we care about and that represent what we believe Judaism to be. During my first months as a rabbi, fresh out of rabbinical school in 2014, I found myself on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, taking part in a nascent anti-racism movement that would soon serve as the springboard for a racial reckoning in this country. And even in those early days, coalitions soon became fraught with anti-Semitism. One day, as we drove to a march, my rabbi and mentor, Rabbi Susan Talvi, shared her philosophy with me, one that continues to guide me today. If our Judaism demands that we show up, then we show up. We do not allow the voices of others to dictate where and how we practice our Judaism. And that voice is the one that I hear now more than ever. If I allow other people to claim the space from me, then I give them the power to define my Jewish practice. But the thing is, nobody gets to define my Judaism but me. And nobody gets to define your Judaism but you. And my Judaism is an inclusive, feminist, progressive, multiracial, multivocal, egalitarian, LGBTQ affirming, justice-oriented, liberal Judaism. And I can't cede those spaces. I have to continue to claim them because they are how I practice my Judaism. And if I and we are going to continue to be in those spaces, then we have to be willing to have the hard conversation, the ones that are sometimes easier to let us pass by precisely because they are uncomfortable. When we find ourselves unwelcome, or when we start to notice that people are carefully avoiding the conversations that really need to be had, the ones that have the potential to move the needle on anti-Semitism and help people understand what it means to be Jewish in the world today, then we need to be courageous enough and audacious enough to say the hard things. But we know how to do that. We've been there before. Every year during the month of Adar, we tell this story to our children. We shake our groggers. We boo at the evil Haman who decides that all Jews are going to die on the 14th of Adar. And we cheer for Mordecai, who begs Esther, the queen who was seemingly chosen at random at the whim of a capricious king, to speak her truth and to tell the king that she too is Jewish. He pleads with her to use her power and her position to save the Jews of her kingdom. And who knows, Mordecai says, maybe you have come into your position for such a time as this. And with those words, Mordecai might well be speaking to us now. This is your moment, Mordecai says. The time for the hard conversation is right now. This is the time when you have the potential to move the needle on anti-Semitism, to speak your truth and define your Judaism. But here's the important thing. Mordecai doesn't tell Esther to go confront Haman because she isn't going to change Haman. He tells her to talk to Achashverosh because that is the risk that's worth taking. That is where she has the possibility to affect real change. Sarah Horn, who's known for her book, People Love Dead Jews, says that we are in a moment of Purim anti-Semitism. There are Hamans out there in the world right now, people who want to kill all the Jews. But most people are not Haman. Most people are Achashverosh, and they don't believe that. But they may not actually know anything about Judaism or what it means to be Jewish. And that means that we need to step up to the plate because it's our turn at bat. This is our Queen Esther moment. But hard conversations are, well, they're hard. David Brooks wrote a book this past year called How to Know a Person. He says that one of the reasons hard conversations are necessary is that we have to ask other people the obvious question. How do you see this? If we're going to have any hope of entering even a little bit, into their point of view. Our differences of perceptions are rooted deeply in the hidden kingdom of the unconscious mind, and we're generally not aware of how profound those differences are until we ask. There is no way to make a hard conversation unhard. You can never fully understand a person whose life experience is very different from your own. Nevertheless, if you work on your skills, your capacity to see and hear others, you really can get a sense of another person's perspective. And I have found that it is quite possible to turn distrust into trust and to build mutual respect. This week I could have had the hard conversation, but I didn't. When my colleagues carefully looked away and avoided talking about the things that we really need to talk about, I let them. Because it was easier to do that than to be vulnerable and to be honest about who I am and what I believe. Instead, I let my fear of what having the hard conversation could mean win out. And that meant that I did not share my full and authentic self with my colleagues and the people that I consider to be my friends. And that isn't fair to me, but it also isn't fair to them. In that moment, we all chose the easy way out. But what if we hadn't? Yes, we avoided making each other uncomfortable. We avoided potentially having a heated exchange. But we also cheated ourselves out of the chance to forge a deeper bond and strengthen our relationships by being willing to take the risk of revealing more about who we are. I didn't take that Queen Esther moment, but I hope that the next time I will. And I hope you will too. Because we each get to define our own Judaism. In this new year, may we choose not to make ourselves smaller and our beliefs smaller for the sake of someone else's comfort. May we all be vulnerable and honest about who we are and what we believe. May we all acknowledge when we don't have the answers. May we be open and curious to hearing things that make us uncomfortable. May we live boldly and proudly and passionately as Jews. May we be the Queen Esthers of the world, the one who step into our power and make it count. Because who knows, maybe we are here for such a time as this. Gamar Chatima Tova.